Good afternoon, and welcome to IAM Online for October. We're glad that you're here. This is the Case Study Showcase, Practical Applications of the InCommon TAP Components Trusted Access Platform webinar. We appreciate you joining us for today's IAM Online. This is the monthly webinar series focused on identity and access management, brought to you by Internet2 and InCommon. As we get underway, I want to let you know today's format. We're welcoming you. We're going to have 4 lightning talks for our webinar this afternoon, followed by Q&A, and then I'll be back to wrap things up. As we get underway, I want to let you know that we are taking questions and comments using the live Zoom Q&A function. So please send those messages during the presentation because we will address them once all of our speakers have concluded. Also, feel free to post messages in the chat, and we will be recording this webinar. You'll receive the link to the recording as well as the slides, and they'll also be posted on the IAM Online page of our website and on our YouTube channel. So once again, we are recording, and you will have access to both the recording and the slides if you're with us this afternoon. In fact, if you've registered for IAM Online, you'll automatically receive an email with that information. So again, this afternoon, we're going to hear 4 lightning talks focused on deployments of the 4 components of the Trusted Access Platform. Your speakers are listed here: Matthew, Jeffrey, Jeremiah, and Grady, and their respective organizations. And with that, I'm happy to turn things over to our first speaker, Matthew at Research Data and Communications Technologies, an InCommon Catalyst, and he will kick off today's presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Economo. I'm the Vice President of Engineering for Research Data and Communication Technologies. We build cyber infrastructure for global research collaborations that help our customers develop and curate public-private partnerships that deepen bioinformatics and research capacity, as well as aid in the development of international science collaboration platforms. Today, I'd like to talk about how we use co-manage in disease research and pandemic response for one of our customers. The challenge, let me talk about our customer. Well, first of all, let me talk about our challenges. The challenge was to transition those international research collaborations from customer-managed user accounts to campus identities while preserving the customer's emergency preparedness and response capability. Co-manage was a key enabler to operating these biomedical research collaborations at global scale. And to give you an idea of some of the numbers involved, we currently have 90 virtual research organizations, or VROs, with over 4,500 scientists and staff across 100 different locations. And that includes 25 active national and international research studies. With co-manage, we can quickly create new virtual research organizations that are focused on common disease research objectives. So about our customer, they are unique because they have this dual mission. Not only do they have to conduct, not only do they have this research mission to conduct basic and applied research into human disease, but also a big part of what they do is pandemic response. Their job is to respond to outbreaks when and wherever they occur. And so to accomplish that mission, our customer partners with local scientists in disease endemic countries to expand research capabilities and training of greatest relevance to the locale. And this partnership includes developing laboratory, clinical field site, and information technology infrastructure through these long-term collaborations. Our customer currently has a number of active research programs underway worldwide. So the primary objective is to give scientists and clinicians access to all of the different tools they use to conduct disease research. Yeah, there's a lot, right? Workflow automation, document management, data transport, metadata-driven EDC, clinical and translational research databases. There's more. I mean, the list goes on. There's a lot that goes into disease research and outbreak response. Of key importance is not just like the outbreak monitoring tools, but also our researchers' ability to monitor active trials, clinical trials for serious adverse events, because a very important part of our job is to protect the human participants of our research studies. Right? Human safety is paramount. Previously, our customer had external user accounts mixed in with their existing directory service. And this was really hard to support because of all the external user accounts. They weren't just remote. A lot of them were overseas, and support in that context is very difficult, especially around basic stuff like identity proofing and password resets. So the key insight we had was to transition to campus identities, where we could use local IT resources, people that were already there in place to support the local scientists and research staff. The local folks could help get our users credentialed, get authenticators working, and to handle whatever support issues came up. So using that local IT support is really important. It helps us to stop duplicating all of this support effort. To do that, though, it's not necessarily easy. We had to make sure that the solution we designed could provision scientists into systems very quickly as part of pandemic response efforts. We also found that we had to work around variations in how campus identity and access management systems operated. They are all different. Sometimes the variations are slight, sometimes they're significant, but everyone implements identity federation standards differently. And we had to work around those variations. A concrete example of a challenge like that is not everybody implements multi-factor authentication today, or if they do, they don't signal multi-factor authentication correctly. So we had to develop a way to dynamically decide whether we were going to use the MFA signal from the campus IAM system or enroll users in our own MFA. On the service provider side, we had to integrate systems from a wide variety of vendors. Figuring out how to provide the necessary authentication and authorization data to those systems was very difficult. But fortunately, we could take advantage of existing work done by LIGO, in the gravitational wave astronomy community, Géant, who is one of our international research partners, and others to build this service. So research collaborations that operate services for use across multiple institutions cannot cede user identification or access management decisions to a single campus IDP. So these collaborations need their own authentication and authorization infrastructure. The ARC blueprint architecture, which is developed by Géant, describes this in detail. But an AAI, authentication and authorization infrastructure, or virtual organization, has three essential components. There's a user registry that manages information about research collaboration members and their access rights. There's a policy repository that controls access to end services based on users' entitlements. And there's an identity proxy that combines campus IDP provided user information with registry managed rights assignments. So CoManage is a collaboration management platform developed jointly by Internet2, LIGO, the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and others, that combines group management with flexible on and offboarding workflows to quickly create these virtual organizations, or what the CoManage team calls a collaborative organization, that's focused on a common objective. And co-manage is really the beating heart of our collaboration management platform. What we do is we take a campus identity in whatever form that takes, register that person with our system using co-manage, and add to that campus identity not just authorization data, but also a brand new VRO identity, a new collaborating researcher identity with our own unique identifiers. The reason we do that is because every single one of the different applications we tie into the research collaboration all expect something different. So the identity providers have their own variances. The service providers also have all their own variances. So some of these research applications expect a Kerberos UPN or some kind of email-like identifier. Others just want a bare username. And there's all kinds of variations in between. Co-manage lets us generate the appropriate attributes for all of those destination applications. And we can send authorization data with that new synthetic identifier. You might hear about just-in-time provisioning in the context of federated identity and access management. We have found that a lot of systems can't do that. So we've deployed an LDAP directory service that's provisioned by co-manage, which those systems can use to get identity and authorization data in the manner they support. Now, this directory isn't like an actual directory service with passwords in it. It's just a user record, a set of user records. But co-manage is capable of provisioning these kinds of external services. And there's a number of provisioner plugins, not just LDAP. Additionally, co-manage's provisioning system has a user extensible plugin architecture. So where we're going with that is we've got some additional custom provisioners that we plan to develop so that we can expand the automatic access control management mechanisms of co-manage. We also want to use co-manage to implement the REFEDS assurance framework. So where we have like a dynamic multi-factor authentication system, we want to implement a dynamic assurance system, again, leveraging co-manage. Co-manage can help us centralize application activity logging, starting with log on, log off accounting. And we really want to bring UX improvements, specifically around customer branding and expanding the use of co-managed user portals or dashboards. Next, Jeffrey Crawford from UCLA will talk about access management with Grouper.
Thank you, Matthew. As mentioned, I am Jeffrey Crawford from UCLA. All right. And we are using Grouper for access management within the university system, especially for, when I say system, I mean like the health and the campus side of things on the UCLA specifically. And we are a pretty decentralized organization. So that's going to be sort of where we're going to start with here. So a little bit about me. I joined the University of California system in 2004, started off with in Santa Cruz, and I joined UCLA in 2018. Something you might find out about me is that I'm a passionate problem solver. I look for the new challenges. I just like learning about interesting new things, and that can be inside or outside of work. And currently my role is managing the identity and access management team, and we report to IT security. UCLA is an R1 university ranked #1 nationally as public universities, along with Berkeley, a distinction we share with them this year. We have about 47,000 students and around 33,000 employees that we directly work with. If you do include the medical center, that jumps up to, I think, like 68,000 or so. And there are 830 departments, all kind of doing more or less their own thing, with some exceptions. So the access management challenge in our area, again, as I mentioned before, UCLA is decentralized. And one of the things that sometimes surprise people is that there is actually a subsection of UCLA that's a high school, Geffen Academy, if anybody ever wants to look that up. So there is that level of separation around UCLA. And there's also a sort of employment section that is called Associated Student at UCLA, which is also not really part of UCLA proper, but still gets managed by our system. So what we're finding is that several different schools are demanding bespoke services for their cohorts. And one of the reasons why is that as we move away from data center deployed custom applications where it doesn't really matter who has access to them, the university is moving more towards SaaS solutions that have licensing restrictions. And a lot of that is because you're using that vendor's infrastructure and they just don't have unlimited amounts of space to be able to store the things that might otherwise have been fine if you were deploying it yourself. And there's a growing expectation among populations, and populations meaning students and employees, that services just need to work. A lot of young people that are coming in are just expecting that when something is supposed to work, it does work. That is something that is over time, setting up your accounts, getting access to things, those are no longer really considered the norm. Things should be automatic. And looking to the future for our particular access data model is that it's going to become richer. It's not going to just be roles and entitlements anymore. Grouper is moving to ABAC models, and some of the roles are going to be time-based, only be able to log in during business hours, or they're going to be tied to part of a org hierarchy. So as the organization starts to organize themselves in the modern times, you might be looking at trying to denote access to levels above just departments. And of course, I think everyone can agree with this. Automation is key here. Access data cleanup to make sure that appropriate access is removed when criteria is no longer met. And that really falls back into that bespoke service point that I made earlier. So we have over 80 integrations when you really think about it. Some of them are pretty easy. Some of them are very complex. Our Adobe Creative Cloud integration is somewhere like mid to complex, not the most complex, but at least something that should be easy enough to understand in this particular context. So Adobe Creative Cloud licensing has specific requirements about what products students and employees can use. Students and employees are kind of considered different populations in this particular case. So if you are a student and an employee, you may have a choice of what kind of product you're using. But if you're an employee, there are certain departments that aren't allowed to save PDF files. And this has a lot to do with the fact that Adobe doesn't support compliance for sensitive data. But it is a storage area that someone theoretically could use if it was accessible to them. So certain departments, usually related to student health services and nonprofit art centers, are not allowed to save PDF files. Although this next bullet point is probably going to be changing in the next few months. Currently, if you're in health sciences, you don't get access to Adobe at all. There is going to be a new licensing product that Adobe is going to support where they can't really save anything at all. That might be coming in the near future. So I'll be excited to talk about that in the future. But obviously, as always the case, there's exceptions, especially for contractors. And if you're a student, you get the student license no matter what your employment record says about you. So students in UCLA is always sort of the highest level affiliation, students before employees, student access before employee access, if you will. And yeah, the high school, those are rather young people, and sometimes you don't want them necessarily being able to save anything that they create that's available publicly, so they should not be able to save PDFs to the cloud as well. So a lot of requirements, but Grouper can do this. So let's go ahead and move forward. So I couldn't think of a better title to this slide, so forgive the silliness of it, but Grouper to the rescue. One of the things, and we have to sort of migrate off of what we did before, but if you're looking at deploying Grouper in a new environment, do follow the Grouper deployment guide. And what I mean by learning from the mistakes is the fact that people have to go back and retrofit things sometimes. So being able to sort of think about your environment from the get-go with examples and suggestions for the deployment guide is always a better route to go. You don't have time to make all the mistakes yourself. When possible, and what we do is we pull as raw data as possible into Grouper, let Grouper calculate the end results. I think what a lot of integration partners tend to like to do is present views, and they say, oh, we define the logic. But then what happens is when you're trying to support things, you wind up having to reach out to a bunch of various departments or systems to try and understand why someone may have access or not. If you pull the raw data into Grouper, get the calculation in Grouper, it's really easy to trace why someone has access to something, and even in some cases why they don't. We load pretty much raw data from our HR system. It references the org hierarchy. It also references job codes and departments. We load data from our SRIS system. We go down to major. We don't go all the way down to courses, but major was what the registrar was comfortable letting us have. So together we can piece the data together to define access in 95% of the cases, including Adobe Creative Cloud in this case. And because we're decentralized, and even if you're not decentralized, you really probably are going to want to have your access management in a central repository, but you're going to need to delegate out the management of those exceptions potentially to other areas of your organization. So we delegate the rest of the access management to business owners to handle exceptions if exceptions are needed. And we also make use of things like membership end dates and grace periods. If you integrate grace periods, you also can have things like emailing people that are going to be in, you won't have access in the next 7 days or something like that. So they can get emails that way. And we make use of Grouper shell templates. It is a little bit of a programming exercise, but we'll find that if you can define a rubric that just sets up your applications and your provisioning areas, for 80% of your cases, you will find that you will be able to do a lot of things very quickly and spin them up. Grouper shell templates are a real valuable thing. And that other 20%, sometimes you just need things that are kind of special. But if you can get to 80%, do it. Don't try to be, don't be perfectionist in this particular case. So what we could already build from, as we said earlier, we store HR data as a group of department, job codes, and employment status. So for this exercise, we had enough to say for a list of departments, we wanted to override the ability of those employees to not have PDF, to override the regular license, I guess you can say, that of being able to say PDF for all the other employees. Exceptions like contractors are handled by a help desk, but the request form has an end date. So when they get added to these exception groups, there's an end date added, so that grouper just remembers the end date. That person no longer has to remember that. Although there isn't really automation in our high school, that group, because of the licensing requirements, is really good at keeping that group up to date. So it's almost as good as being automatic, but it's not. And someday it probably will be, but it's just not there yet. And student status is driven by integration to the student information system. So we know who's an active student, and we also know which employees are in health sciences versus campus. So that was really valuable. So this is sort of a visual structure. If you think of the manual sources or automatic sources being on the left, the middle is sort of the intermediate groups that define what particular entitlement someone should have, or a role, depending on how you define it at your campus. And then the diamonds on the right side are the final entitlements. So if you follow these down, you can sort of see that Grouper is calculating out that access. So if we see that someone has a no PDF and we want to figure out why, we can click down into that particular record and see it trace all the way back up to where the source was. And so that's really invaluable to figure out how to support a particular cohort in one spot. Even though it does sort of involve you to be part of the definition, you're still granting access to the day-to-day management to someone else, and you're sort of setting up the logic one time, hopefully. I mean, obviously logic changes sometimes, but generally speaking, it's more rare than it is common. And of course, you can kind of see there's sort of the big red manual deny button. So when someone gets added to that one because they're credential loss, or there's just an issue with that particular account holder, those take out those entitlements altogether and do not allow them to utilize that service going forward. Okay, what the future holds and what's our lessons learned. We're working on our financial system access base based on access the Oracle security model provides. Although real-time updates go to our enterprise directory through the LDAP connectors, there is definitely a desire to go more API routes, especially as vendors using APIs. Grouper does have a RabbitMQ endpoint that allows you to capture changes and then have something subscribe to it and then be able to do some action based on a change happening. We're working on deploying Grouper in a high availability mode in AWS. We still run it on on-prem databases with sometimes periodically patching, and there's definitely a desire to have Grouper be a highly available service so that we're not forced to use our LDAP structure to offer high availability. We feed Grouper data into, well, we're thinking of feeding Grouper data into an IGA solution so we can incorporate generic provisioning and account lifecycle management, but Grouper still holds the logic about who's active and so on and so forth. And we're designing a structure around Grouper permissions with org hierarchy. That's sort of an ongoing project that is related to replacing our financial system, but that's one of the requirements that some of those systems have. So again, I'm Jeffrey Crawford. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it over to Jeremiah Haywood, who's the IAM administrator for Illinois State University. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or put a question into the question feature. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm here to talk a little bit about our journey with Midpoint at Illinois State University. Some background on me. Started with ISU and their Information Security Office around 2017, and then moved into the Identity and Access Management team in 2019. You know, kind of a tinkerer at heart, so I really like to you know, work with hardware and build computers or kind of mess around with software as well. So it's kind of one of those things I really enjoy doing. And I'm currently in the lead IAM administrator position on our IAM team. And some background about Illinois State University. We are a public research university located right there in central Illinois. And a little bit about our populations at ISU. We hover around 20,000 or so active students and 3,500 employees. And much like a lot of higher ed institutions, we kind of have a mixture when it comes to IT. We have a centralized IT unit, which the IAM team is a part of, as well as our distributed IT teams that are, you know, tied to the specific colleges, whether that be the College of Education or College of Business and the other ones that are on campus. So to speak a little bit about what started, you know, our journey with Midpoint, it kind of relied around our identity and access management kind of being stagnant. Our previous IAM systems lacked the critical functionality that you would expect out of Identity Manager. So, you know, being able to do identity data reconciliation, making sure the data from our source systems are correct in our IDM, as well as being correct in our downstream systems, whether that be Active Directory or LDAP. And some of the other functionalities that it was kind of missing out on was ineffective membership management. So reliably removing people from groups or adding people, it was really just failing with that. So that kind of, with those features lacking, we had a lot of external scripts that were there to supplement our identity system and make sure you know, it was kind of doing the basic functionality that's required. And then our second one was the legacy deployment methodology that we had in place. You know, kind of that pets versus cattle approach. Our previous implementation definitely was kind of the pet methodology, where, you know, we had traditional servers, and it was hard to upgrade and took a lot of time to restart nodes and keep things versioned. So that kind of, both of those leads to our inability to innovate as an IAM team. You know, it was really hard to keep up with industry best practices and deliver new functionality to other units that might have needed it, because we were really focused on keeping the lights on and kind of keeping that basic functionality working. So that leads us to the modernized IAM project that we had at ISU. Encompassed implementing 3 new IAM applications, Shibboleth, Grouper, and Midpoint, all from the Trusted Access platform, as well as an overhaul to our account management portal, which sits right in front of our identity management system, where end users are able to log in and change their password or do prefer name requests and things of that nature. So this project involved working with a large variety of stakeholders, centralized IT, some of those distributed units that relied on the functionality that our identity system was providing. Then, of course, our registrar's office and mission, and faculty and students, just kind of making sure we were accounting for everything that they required. So our main goals were to decommission our legacy IDM that was in place, kind of do a drop and replace of the functionality that was currently there, and then kind of improve where we could, but ultimately limit any major end user changes. So kind of almost sneak in Midpoint without end users noticing that we did it, but still have improvements on the IAM side. So this brings us to one of the major features that we were able to deliver on with the implementation of Midpoint, was our PeopleSoft data flow. So we have campus solutions and HCM on here at ISU, where it's having our source data for student and employee data. And all of that was being fed, or is being fed, into an identity data view, where you have a centralized table with all these identity data elements that we want to be fed into our identity management system. And that's using Midpoint's live sync. So as changes are made in CF, that increments a timestamp, and we're able to read that in near real time, almost like a messaging system, basically. And then some data that we needed to send back to CS, whether that be activation details that are coming from our account management portal that's sitting in front, activation dates, or electronic signature surveys, and all those type of fields we're needing to send back to Campus Solutions. So we are just using a delivery connector from Midpoint to provision a database, and that database is set up with Kafka Connect, where there's a Debezium connector that's able to read change events that are happening to the database and the write-ahead logs, and translate those into Kafka messages. And previously, in our old identity management system or setup, our integrations team, which is a team of developers that works on integrations between systems, they had a lot of code that was already using those Kafka queues to translate messages to and from CS. So they were able to, by and large, keep a lot of that code. There was some minor changes they needed to make, but being able to kind of use this setup to provision the table and then have it translate messages to Kafka saved us a lot of time in integrations work. So some results and lessons learned from our implementation. When we went live, we had some major identity data cleanup, over 100,000 attribute modifications across the directories. So that was a lot of stale data that was out there, standardization that we put in place for different elements and fields. So we had a lot of data cleanup that happened when we went live with Midpoint. And we were also able to improve some IAM processes. One of the biggest ones being our affiliation synchronization process. Prior, that mainly was housed in Campus Solutions, and our integrations team was able to read out some of that role data and synchronize it over to our old IDM. But now with Grouper and Midpoint in place, we have control over all of those queries and the process to sync those affiliations. So if anything needed to happen out of band, or we're able to schedule those a lot more frequently through Grouper and have that drive provisioning and affiliations in Midpoint. And then secondly was our password expiration process. Our old process used kind of a method of account disabling when passwords expired. And this led to a less than desirable results for our end users, where they would let their passwords expire and their accounts would disable. And then that would lead to them being removed from Teams groups and other functionality that they required to work. So when they went back in to recover their password, there would be a delay that would occur. But now with Midpoint, we've moved to a password scrambling method where recovery is a lot quicker and people are able to get back into their accounts and do the work that they need to. So one of the major a couple of the major takeaways is you can't spend too much time on quality assurance. Previously we had dev and test environments that were largely out of sync, and we did a lot of work to bring those up to date, but we also spin up new QA environments where we loaded a QA prod or a QA Active Directory and a QA Oracle Directory Server for LDAP with prod data, so we could be really confident about the work that Midpoint was going to do against those directories when we brought it live. So just being able to do as much testing as you can to instill the confidence in the product and what mappings you have configured. And then lastly, being able to get involved with all the stakeholders as early as possible, just being able to reach out to those other teams that are using the functionality that you provide to figure out what's going to be impacted by the changes that you might implement, or what they might want from your new product too. So next in our Midpoint journey is the automation of our secondary account lifecycle. Currently, or previously, secondary accounts were completely separated from their primary account, and that involved a lot of manual offboardings and onboardings. But with our new applications group or Midpoint, we're able to use those features to tie them together and link them up, so we can have some automation around the life cycle of admin accounts or student employee accounts, where an employee leaves the university and they're no longer affiliated as say a civil service employee. Their admin account will automatically start a deprovisioning process, whereas prior we had to do that completely manually. And then that kind of ties into the improved privilege account management, looking to use those features that we're able to combine with Grouper and Midpoint, as well as hopefully using Midpoint's API to kind of tie in a secrets management system or some type of vault to be able to combine the two to work better with privileged accounts. And then lastly, provisioning beyond the directories. Currently right now we're just provisioning Active Directory and our LDAP server, but I know there's a lot of connectors out there that the community has worked on, as well as Evolvium for account provisioning. So being able to use those would be great. Have some resources there if anybody's interested for looking into how we set up the Kafka messages using the Debezium and Midpoint 5 synchronization. And if you need to reach out to me, you can message me or email me at my email there. I'm going to hand it off to Grady Bailey at UT Austin.
All right. Thank you, Jeremiah. As he said, my name is Grady Bailey. I work at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm here to talk to you about the Trusted Access Platform Shibboleth container and how we implemented it here at UT Austin. So a little bit about me. Again, I work at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm in the ITS Campus Solutions organization, which is one of 4 central IT organizations, all kind of united under one umbrella recently. And I'm on the Identity and Access Management team. I am not, despite my best efforts as a child, an athlete. Although the football team here has had some success, good success this year, doesn't include me. I started my adventure in IT at UT Austin back in 2008. I joined the IAM team in 2017, And I started leading the authentication and directory services team under IAM in 2020. And then back in 2021, 2022, I was our liaison for the InCommon Collaboration Success Program. I was the liaison between our team and the CSP, and I kind of facilitated the communication between our groups on campus and who wanted to participate in the CSP. And so that's kind of that wasn't my first foray into the InCommon community, but it was probably what led me here today, honestly. A little bit more about IAM at UT Austin. You could see kind of the structure of our team in this slide. We are when we're fully staffed, we're a team of 16, and we kind of have three groups. We have two formal sub teams. One is authentication directory services, which I lead. That includes our enterprise directory service, our enterprise authentication service, multi-factor authentication, a couple of other services under there. Then we have the identity governance and administration team. That team holds our identity management service, as well as our group enroll management and some other authorization and identity management services. And then in the middle, we've got a group of business analysts and project managers who kind of they're not directly part of one team or the other. They help out as we need those resources on various projects across our team. I also included this slide to show you a bit about the scale and size of IAM at UT Austin. We are, UT Austin, the University of Texas, is rather large. So we have, this data is, I believe this was current as of December 2022 or January 2023. So we're getting ready to refresh this here in a couple of months. But at the time, we had close to 10.5 million identities under our care. You could see all the other very, very large numbers there. If you'd like to look at this yourself, I included a link to iamservices.utexas.edu/metrics, where you can view that, as well as a lot of other information we have on our IAM services page. So to get into what the meat of what I want to talk to today is authentication, and specifically how we implemented Shibboleth at UT Austin for our enterprise authentication service. To get there, we need to talk a bit about the past, because what's past is prologue. So let's go through a little history of authentication at UT. Way back in the 1990s is when we went live with our first website and our first version of any sort of web authentication. The central web authentication service, it was a kind of a combination of a couple of different pieces and parts and services, including something known as the fat cookie, which was a big encrypted cookie that contained a lot of different pieces of data about an individual. That cookie could then be read by applications to facilitate a form of single sign-on authentication within the UT web services space. That existed from, again, around the 1990s, late 1990s, all the way up until 2014. We also, for a period of time, we had a service, an implementation of Shibboleth that was, I'll borrow what Jeremiah said earlier. It was, they were pets, not cattle. We had a couple of servers, full virtual machines running the Shibboleth identity provider software. That made up a UT Shibboleth service that ran from the best records I could get was it was part of the IAM team back in 2012, and it ran until we retired it in 2020. And then we had UT Login. This was an implementation of a vendor product, and that came up in 2014, and we ran that until 2020. It had SAML, it had a proprietary web SSO as well, and something that we call the transitional fat cookie, which means that that old cookie infrastructure actually carried forward in some way, shape, or form, and still kind of carries forward today to an extent on one particular area of campus, but that that carried all the way forward until we started transitioning off of it in the UT login era. So that brought us to enterprise authentication. We had UT login, and this vendor product, it served its purpose, but we got into a point where it wasn't quite stable. That was due to a number of factors, the way we implemented it, some of the changes that we made, the load that we were putting on the system. And in June of 2017, that's right around when I joined the IAM team, we had to implement a stability roadmap. We had to go out to campus and we had to apologize for the stability of this central authentication service. We had to list out a plan. How are we going to stabilize this? How are we going to earn back your trust in the identity and access management team? And so that's kind of where my story on the IAM team starts. And it's also where the story of enterprise authentication starts. Sorry, the slide advanced and gave you a brief preview of what's coming next. On top of the stability roadmap, we decided to implement what we called UT Login V2. This was the next version of that vendor product and the next step in what was going to be central web SSO at UT Austin. We were going to move to the latest and greatest version of this vendor product and build that out. And that was going to be the successor to UT Login and solve all of our problems. That project ran for a while, and it wasn't as easy as we hoped it would be. And so at a point during that project, I was asked as the Shibboleth lead to look into the feasibility of using Shibboleth as the central authentication service for campus, not just as UT Shibboleth, not just as a sidecar to facilitate connection to InCommon or anything like that, but can it be everything we need it to be? And everyone will tell you that you can't have something good, fast, and cheap. And that's what I was asked to look into. I was asked to find a solution that was good, solution that was fast, a solution that was cheap. And you're going around, you're looking for something that can do that. And I stumbled upon, at the time, case studies from the Collaboration Success Program, where institutions had come together as part of cohorts for the CSP, and they had done implementations of the tier at the time, then later, now we know it as TAP, the Trusted Access Platform, of these software components. And they wrote case studies, and they did presentations and wrote things down, kind of like we're doing here today. So we're coming full circle a little bit. But I found all of this documentation on how these other institutions had implemented Shibboleth to be a campus-wide service. And so fast, cheap, good, fast, cheap. The Collaboration Success Program was kind of dead in the middle, and that does exist. And that's what we decided to do. So now let's get back to that history. We had the roadmap. We had UT Login V2. Then things start moving really, really fast. In February of 2019, we started doing some of the initial planning for enterprise authentication, putting together our requirements. We gathered requirements from our previous UT Login implementation, from the UT Shibboleth implementation. We put all of these things together, came up with our list of requirements for this new service. We talked to our campus customers, and we looked over the issues that we had with UT Login. What did we need to do to win back trust of campus? What did we need to do to get a service up that was going to be stable and people were going to be able to use? And again, trust, because that's where we were in a state where people didn't have a lot of trust in us. So we did this initial planning until about May, and that's when we started development. So we were only developing this and building this out really from May until September of 2019. And in September of 2019, we went live. We had built out a service, used the Trusted Access Platform containers, and we went live with it in 2019, and we started transitioning customers over. That meant we were transitioning the customers from UT Login and from UT Shibboleth, and that took a while because we had to communicate with each individual customer. We had to figure out what do they need, what do we have, and let's get them moved over. But eventually, we got to what we needed. We retired UT Login in December of 2020, and then we retired UT Shibboleth in August 2021. We made it. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture. I mentioned we used containers. We were using Docker and Docker Swarm from those Trusted Access Platform containers. We're running enterprise authentication primarily in virtual machines in our on-prem data center. Those virtual machines are all configured and maintained using Ansible. And we do have an AWS presence currently. It's involves a couple of EC2 instances and some networking black magic, where we, in the event that campus is offline, we route things to that AWS infrastructure so that central authentication can maintain, can continue for people who are not on campus or they're accessing services that are off campus. It utilizes, again, I mentioned a couple of bits of networking black magic. Azure Traffic Manager does some fancy DNS rerouting, and it's essentially a hot failover. It's live all the time. The architecture here, architecture diagram, these slides, this is recorded. These slides are going to be available. If you'd like to look at it more in depth, you can do that. But it basically just describes the whole flow of how an end user gets to our enterprise authentication service. Again, it is a Docker Swarm with multiple hosts in it, multiple containers running all cleanly, and they can go up, they can go down pretty seamlessly without people noticing. It is, as Jeremiah said, the common container paradigm of they're cattle, they're not pets. We don't care if a container dies because it's going to come back. We will rotate them out, and we have it so that it's relatively seamless. We also have a metadata management service. It's a microservice that supports enterprise authentication. It handles all of our metadata for all of our SAML integrations. It's an implementation of a tool called Python Federation Feeder. It pulls in all of our external metadata sources and compiles them down, and it serves that to our identity provider via the metadata query protocol. So that means none of our external metadata is within the identity provider. So the IDP runs really slim because it doesn't have all the memory bloat of external metadata. It's all in the metadata manager service. We do a new deploy and build of this every 3 hours on an automated schedule into production. So we never look at the metadata manager really. It builds and deploys itself every 3 hours, refreshes metadata as our customers change it, and we don't really have to worry about it. This is a quick look at how enterprise authentication grew. The furthest left-hand side there, that's when we first kind of went live with it, and then I believe I took this screenshot back in the summer, so it doesn't quite go to our most recent spike for classes starting again in August, September, but you can see kind of the cycle. And so we were doing close to 6.5 million authentications at the peak. And then this is our active service providers by month. You can see how it grew over time as we onboarded more and more customers. We do a lot of monitoring using Splunk dashboards. We have a lot of fancy Splunk dashboards where we've processed the logs and turned them into nice little visible graphs and such. It really helps for keeping tabs on things. Always happy to talk more about what we do with Splunk. We're working towards some more improved visibility using newer tools and methodologies using Prometheus and Grafana. You may have heard me talk about that in other presentations, but that's kind of where we're looking to go. And that brings me to the future. We're looking to implement the Shibboleth, the IDP UI project that is also kind of part of the Trusted Access Platform. We're looking to replace our metadata manager that is Python Federation feeder with IDP UI so that we can do some self-service, allow people to do their own integrations. We want to do more metadata-driven configuration. We're implementing OpenID Connect right now. Actually, I've got some of my engineers working on that right now, as well as a cloud-native infrastructure. We're building out everything in EKS. We're planning to move all of this into EKS and make it cloud native in AWS within the next few months. We are working on that right now. And then a couple of lessons learned from this implementation. First, the community, everyone in InCommon, your peers in higher education, the community is crucial. That's how I learned how to do this and how I learned what the pitfalls were. You learn from other people's failures and successes, and then you make your own and you share those, and other people learn from that. It's a great cycle, and it benefits everyone. Then don't reinvent the wheel. Someone else probably already has a wheel that will work for you. I promise we find ourselves in a space a lot where we think of ourselves as special. But you're probably not as special as you think you are. You're probably more similar to someone than you think you are. And then finally, borrowing a phrase that my wife uses a lot with our 6-year-old, you can do hard things. I promise these sorts of implementations, not just Shibboleth, but co-manage, grouper, midpoint, they look really hard. You can do hard things. And again, as contact information goes, feel free to find me on Slack. I'm on the InCommon Slack channels, or you can email me, gbailey@austin.utexas.edu. And that is all for me. I think we have a few minutes for some Q&A at this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Grady, and everybody for your presentations this afternoon. So much good information, and you all have been answering some questions in the Q&A as you were presenting. I don't see any additional questions in the Q&A at the moment, but if you have a question, oh, one just popped up. If you do have a question you'd like to ask before we wrap up today, please do. Okay, and actually that one was for me. All right. Any final closing remarks from any of our panelists? If not, I will go ahead and close this out.
Has a raised hand.
Oh, okay, great. Sure, go ahead, Chris. Chris, you should be able to talk now. And muted you.
I accidentally hit the raise hand.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead. Oh, you didn't want to have a question. Okay, I see. Got it. Sorry. All right, we do have a question. This is from Gretchen from Grady. We'll do this one before we sign off. Do all 7.5, sorry, I'm not going to read this correctly, 7.5 M at Austin guest authenticate through the UT login version 2?
So the quick answer is yes. Everyone authenticates through the service that I mentioned, and that's actually enterprise authentication. That's the implementation of Shibboleth. The UT login version 2 that never actually went into production. That was the re-implementation of that vendor product that we ended up moving on from in favor of the enterprise authentication service that's an implementation of Shibboleth. But yes, everyone authenticates through that service. There are a few things that are connected to Microsoft authentication, ADFS, but those, it's very minor. Everyone does go through enterprise authentication.
All right, excellent. That is all that we have time for this afternoon. So with that, I'll close things out. Many thanks to Matthew, Jeff, Jeremiah, and Grady for great presentations. We appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who joined us for IAM Online this afternoon. We appreciate you being here if you posed a question or just listened in. And also special thanks to Susan and the rest of the Internet Team Meetings team, who make it possible for us to bring IAM Online to you each and every month. Before we sign off, I do want to remind you that this presentation was recorded. You will receive both the recording and the slides probably later this week or early next week. We'll make those materials available. As you're leaving, there is a quick survey, a 4-question survey we would ask you all to complete if you could. Also want to let you know there's still time to register for our upcoming training courses. We have courses coming up that cover the components that you heard about this afternoon. So please check out our website for that information. Those training courses are brought to you from InCommon Academy. So again, if you'd like to learn more, you can reach out to our speakers or visit our website for information about those upcoming training workshops. With that, we'll be back next month with another great program. So please check your email and website for details. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you for November IAM Online. Have a great rest of the day.